The demon that lived inside my mirror. Mirrors don't just reflect what we see. Sometimes, they reflect what's been waiting to be seen. People think their fears live inside their minds, but what if they've always lived just beyond the glass, watching quietly? This is the story of a man who discovered that truth too late. It began as an ordinary inheritance, a simple antique mirror placed against his bedroom wall. But within its frame, something waited, something that knew his face, his voice, and his thoughts. When he finally understood what it wanted, his reflection was no longer his own. And neither was he. The mirror arrived on a rainy afternoon. The movers had left it by the hallway wall, wrapped in a sheet yellowed with age. Nathan didn't remember asking for it, but the delivery slip bore his late grandmother's name and a signature that resembled hers, shaky but unmistakable. He had inherited her house, a quiet, leaning Victorian relic on the outskirts of town. Every room smelled faintly of dust and old wood polish, as if time itself had settled into the walls. The mirror seemed out of place among the dull furniture, tall, arched, framed in black oak carved with strange looping patterns that looked almost like eyes. When he uncovered it, the glass was spotless, unervingly so. No dust, no scratches. It was as though the mirror had never been touched by air. The reflection was too clear, sharper, almost more real than the world it showed. He caught himself staring, feeling the odd pull of his own gaze, until a chill ran down his arms and broke the trance. That night, he dragged the mirror into his bedroom. It fit perfectly against the far wall, facing the bed. He told himself he'd move it later, but exhaustion smothered that thought. He dreamed of corridors, long, narrow, endless, each lined with mirrors. In every reflection, he stood still while his mirrored self tilted its head slightly to the side, eyes widening. He woke with his heart hammering, cold sweat clinging to his back. The room was silent, but the air felt crowded, thick. The mirror gleamed faintly in the dark, though no light touched it. Morning came gray and reluctant. Nathan made coffee, trying to forget the dream. The mirror, however, refused to be ignored. Every time he passed, he caught movement that didn't belong, a flicker of shadow just behind his reflection, gone when he looked directly. He blamed lack of sleep. By the third day, the feeling had changed. The mirror no longer felt like an object in his room, it felt like a presence. Sometimes, when he walked by without looking, he could feel it watching him. It wasn't paranoia. It was awareness. On the seventh day, he noticed something impossible. His reflection blinked, half a second too late. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to freeze him mid-step. He stared into his own eyes, daring it to happen again. It didn't. He laughed it off, though his throat was dry. That night, he covered the mirror with an old bedsheet. He didn't like sleeping under its gaze anymore. But sometime around midnight, he woke to a soft rustling sound. The air felt colder than before. The sheet had slipped, just enough to reveal a sliver of glass. His reflection was standing in exactly the same position, but its head was tilted, slightly off-center, its expression blank. He froze, breath caught in his chest. He forced himself to whisper that it wasn't real, that sleep and stress were distorting his mind. Yet even as he stared, the faintest movement rippled across the glass, not like motion, but like a surface trembling in response to something beneath it. The next morning, Nathan called a local antiques appraiser, hoping the mirror's history might explain its strange aura. The man arrived 2 days later, an older gentleman with thick glasses and the calm demeanor of someone who's seen too many curiosities. He examined the carvings with mild interest, tracing one of the looping eye-shaped designs. Unusual, the appraiser murmured. Could be late 1800s. European craftsmanship, maybe Italian. Mirrors like this were sometimes used in old mourning rituals, meant to capture the spirit of the deceased temporarily, until a priest could bless the home. Nathan forced a laugh. So, what, a ghost trap? The man smiled thinly. A symbolic one, yes. They believed mirrors held reflections of the soul. Cover them after death so nothing gets trapped. After the appraiser left, Nathan stared at the covered glass for a long time. A symbolic one, he'd said. But the thought dug deeper than it should have. His grandmother's house had been lined with old portraits, eyes too lifelike, always watching. She'd kept mirrors covered after his grandfather died, every single one. He uncovered it again that evening. The surface looked ordinary, harmless. His reflection stood still, slightly weary, but normal. He leaned closer, studying the frame. The carving seemed to shift under the dim lamplight, edges warping subtly like breathing. He stepped back. His reflection didn't. It stayed close, face nearly pressed against the glass. His stomach dropped. He blinked, and suddenly the reflection matched him again, standing where it should. He backed away slowly, refusing to look again. He turned off the light, left the room, and slept on the couch downstairs. The following days blurred. He ate less, slept less. Every noise seemed amplified, the house groaning, the wind brushing against the windows. He began catching glimpses of movement behind him, flashes of something pale in the glass. One evening, while washing his face, he noticed that the reflection in the bathroom mirror didn't quite match the lighting in the room. His reflection stood in a dimmer, colder space. He touched the glass. It felt warmer than it should. That night, the dreams returned. Only this time, he wasn't alone. The reflection in his dream smiled. Not with malice, but with familiarity, as if it had been waiting for recognition. When he woke, the faint echo of that smile remained, burned into his vision. Days turned into weeks. The mirror began to hum faintly at night, a vibration so low it felt more than heard. Nathan began avoiding his bedroom entirely. But wherever he went, reflections seemed to follow, windows, water, polished metal. He'd catch glimpses of his reflection even when his body was turned away. On the final night of the month, he decided to remove the mirror completely. He wrapped it tightly in the sheet again, tied it with cord, and dragged it toward the front door. But as he reached the hallway, the house lights flickered out, leaving him in near darkness. The air thickened, cold and still. He heard something faint, not sound, exactly, but movement, like slow, deliberate breathing behind the glass. He dropped the mirror. The sheet slipped free. In the dim moonlight, his reflection stood upright in the glass, though he had stepped back. Its head tilted slightly to one side, just as it had in his dreams. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw another figure standing behind it, faint, almost transparent, with eyes that weren't his. He stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. The bulb shattered, plunging the room into deeper darkness. The mirror gleamed faintly in the shards of moonlight that filtered through the curtains. Then, for the first time, the reflection smiled. Nathan didn't remember falling. When he came to, the mirror was gone. But in its place, a faint outline remained on the wall, tall, arched, and impossibly clean, as though something had been wiped from the surface of reality itself. Nathan woke at dawn, stiff and cold on the floor of the hallway. A faint blue light filtered through the curtains, turning the dust in the air to pale threads. The mirror was gone. At first, he thought he must have dragged it somewhere in panic, but every corner of the house was bare. No broken glass, no frame, no trace of weight dragged across the boards. Only a faint imprint on the wall remained, like frost melted in the shape of its outline. The silence was heavy, the kind that seemed to listen. He told himself he should be relieved, yet the stillness felt worse than the mirror's presence. Something had shifted, an emptiness that wasn't natural, as if part of the house had been peeled away with the mirror. He made coffee with trembling hands. The window above the sink fogged from the steam, and for a moment he caught the vague suggestion of his reflection in it. Only his head was turned slightly to the left while his own body faced forward. He wiped the glass clean, heart pounding. By noon, he convinced himself to leave the house. He needed air, people, noise, anything real. But when he reached the front door, he noticed the faintest glint of glass through the narrow window on the landing. A shard? A reflection? He hesitated, then climbed the stairs. The landing was empty. Yet as he stood there, the air grew cooler, the faint smell of old varnish returning. And there it was again. His reflection, but not on any surface he could see. It hung faintly in the air before him, like heat distortion, just enough to catch the shape of his face. He backed away slowly until it vanished. Nathan spent the next few days sleeping downstairs, lights on. The outlines of the mirror would fade by morning but return at dusk, glimmering faintly like breath on invisible glass. Sometimes, when the house settled at night, he'd hear a low hum rising from the walls. One evening, a neighbor knocked, an older woman from across the street. She said she'd noticed his lights burning all night, every night. Her eyes softened when he told her about the mirror. "Your grandmother," she said, "used to keep that thing covered. Said it belonged to her mother before her. The family never looked into it after dark." Nathan tried to laugh it off, but the neighbor didn't smile. "When she was sick, she made me promise not to move it. Said it didn't like being disturbed." That night, he couldn't stop thinking about the word it. Not she, not the mirror, but it. He sat in the living room until after midnight, staring at the staircase. At first, he thought he was imagining the faint shimmer on the landing. Then it grew clearer, a thin vertical line of light widening until it formed a familiar tall shape. The outline of the mirror was back, except this time, the glass had returned. It wasn't a sudden appearance but a slow bleeding into existence, like a photograph developing. The surface shimmered faintly, rippling with a light that came from nowhere. He stood at the base of the stairs, unable to move. In the mirror's pale glow, his reflection waited at the top, perfectly still. He whispered his own name without realizing it, testing if the reflection would mimic him. It didn't. It only blinked, once, then tilted its head the way it always did, slightly off, slightly wrong. Nathan fled to the kitchen, gripping the counter until his knuckles whitened. He told himself not to look at the window. He did anyway. His reflection was there too, closer this time, face nearly pressed against the glass, eyes open too wide. Every reflective surface in the house began to hold its own subtle delay. Not a full second, just enough to notice. A lag between motion and imitation. Sleep became impossible. The house grew colder each night. When dawn came, the reflections matched him again, docile, obedient. But by dusk, they began to move on their own, making small adjustments as if practicing independence. One evening, desperate, Nathan smashed the bathroom mirror. The crash echoed through the house. But when he turned toward the shards on the floor, every piece still reflected his face, each one showing a different expression. Some smiled faintly, others frowned. He covered the sink with a towel, heart pounding, and left the room. From behind the door, he thought he heard the faint sound of glass shifting. Days blurred into each other. He stopped answering calls, stopped eating properly. The only sign of time passing was the deepening shadows in the corners of the house. Sometimes, while half awake, he'd sense another figure walking in step with him, just outside his vision. One night, he decided to leave for good. He packed a bag and avoided every surface that could reflect. As he reached the front door, he noticed something strange. The faint light of dawn glimmering off the doorknob was tinted darker than it should be, almost like smoke inside glass. When he turned the handle, the metal felt warm, alive. The door didn't open. He stepped back. The windows were black mirrors now, swallowing all light. Behind him, he felt movement, a subtle shift of air. The same awareness that had haunted him since the first day now filled the entire house. He turned toward the staircase. The mirror stood at the top again, fully solid, framed by shadows. His reflection waited there, still, head tilted. Nathan's breath trembled. He took one cautious step upward, then another. The house was silent except for the soft creak of the boards. As he reached the landing, he noticed something impossible. The reflection wasn't standing in the mirror anymore. It was standing in front of it. It mirrored none of his movements. It didn't need to. Its expression was calm, almost sympathetic, like someone looking at an old friend who'd finally understood a private joke. He stepped closer. The air around him pulsed faintly, warm and electric. The reflection leaned forward and placed its hand against the inside of the glass, though the surface didn't ripple. It shimmered, as if both worlds had thinned to one fragile membrane. Nathan hesitated, hand trembling inches from the surface. Every instinct screamed to run. But curiosity, fatal, human curiosity, rooted him in place. He reached out. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the glass beneath his fingertips felt not cold but soft, like breathing skin. His reflection's expression shifted, eyes widening in what looked almost like relief. Light swallowed the room. When it faded, Nathan was alone again. The mirror stood quietly, harmless, ordinary. His reflection was still there, matching every move. He laughed shakily, wiping his eyes. The relief was dizzying. Maybe it had all been a hallucination born of exhaustion. He turned to leave. Behind him, in the mirror, his reflection did not. It stayed still as he walked away, head tilting slightly to one side. Its lips parted as though forming a single word he couldn't hear. By morning, the neighbors noticed the house's windows were all covered from the inside. A faint outline of a tall figure could sometimes be seen behind the curtains, standing perfectly still, facing inward. When the property was eventually inspected months later, everything inside was undisturbed except for one thing. In the bedroom, leaning against the far wall, was the mirror, dustless, immaculate. And behind the glass, a faint image stood motionless. It wore Nathan's clothes. Its eyes followed whoever looked for too long. If you've ever glanced into a mirror and thought your reflection lingered a little too long, remember this story. Some surfaces don't just show what's real, they show what's waiting. Nathan's mirror was sold again, quietly, to another collector. They say it still looks flawless, untouched by time. But sometimes, at night, a second shape appears behind the glass. If you ever find a mirror that feels too alive, cover it. Leave it. Forget it. And if it ever uncovers itself, subscribe for more true dark horror stories, and whatever you do, don't look too long into your own reflection.